Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are wading into waters that I think most people believe they know how to navigate, but in reality, they're probably drowning without even realizing it.
Mhm.
We are talking about media bias. And I know as soon as those words leave my mouth, about half the audience is probably picturing a specific cable news anchor screaming at the camera,
Right.
and the other half is picturing a different anchor screaming at a different camera.
It's the immediate reflex, isn't it? We hear media bias,
Right.
and our brains just snap right into that culture war framework.
Totally. Red versus blue, Fox versus MSNBC. It's like we treat it as a team sport where the other side is always cheating and our side is just, tragically misunderstood.
And that's the whole problem. We're so focused on the players and the teams that we completely miss the fact that the entire stadium is tilted. The game itself is rigged, but not in the way we think.
Right. And if we just spend the next hour bashing pundits or, complaining about fake news, we are wasting everyone's time. Because the research we have in front of us today suggests that the political stuff, that partisan shouting, is just the tip of the iceberg.
A very, very noisy tip.
A very noisy tip, for sure. But the really dangerous part is the stuff we don't see. The stuff that's happening below the surface.
Exactly. The mission today is to look at the mechanics under the hood. We aren't really looking at who is biased so much as how the machine is built to produce bias, almost automatically.
Right.
We need to move beyond this idea that bias is just some angry editor in a back room, plotting to destroy the country. The reality is much more boring.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, it's actually much more terrifying.
How so?
Because it's structural, it's economic, and it's deeply psychological. It's not a conspiracy, it's a business model.
We are going to talk about ski resorts lying about snow, baseball fans in the 1890s, and maybe the most uncomfortable part, why your own brain is actually the one demanding to be lied to.
That's the part people don't like to hear.
Yeah, I bet. But before we get to all the weird history, we need a baseline. How are we even defining bias here? Because I feel like that word has completely lost all meaning. It's just become a synonym for something I disagree with.
Well, that's definitely the colloquial use, yeah. But if we look at the sort of academic definition provided in the research we're looking at, media bias is defined very specifically.
Okay.
It's when journalists and news producers contravene the standards of journalism, things like accuracy, fairness, and objectivity, in a way that implies a pervasive or widespread drift.
A drift. I like that word.
It's key. It's not just one guy having a bad day or,
Yeah.
cranky opinion column. It's a systemic violation of the rules of the game. It's a tilt in the floorboards that makes everything slide in one direction.
That's a great way to visualize it. And I think the most interesting part of the research we're diving into is that this tilt isn't always political. In fact, some of the strongest, most reality-warping biases have absolutely nothing to do with who you vote for.
No, not at all. They are what you might call invisible biases that distort reality for everyone, regardless of their politics.
Okay, so let's start there then. The outline calls it the taxonomy of bias. We all know partisan bias. That's the my team good, your team bad stuff. We can put that to the side for a minute. But the research lists this whole zoo of other biases. Where do we even begin? Which one is the most pervasive?
I would argue the most pervasive, and certainly the least discussed, is something called concision bias.
Concision, as in being concise, being brief.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Why is that bad? I don't have 3 hours to read a manifesto every morning. I want the headlines. I want the bullet points. Isn't brevity a virtue?
Brevity is absolutely a virtue for communication, but it can be a poison for understanding. Concision bias is the tendency of the media to report views that can be summarized succinctly,
Okay.
while crowding out unconventional or complex views that take, time and effort to explain.
Give me a concrete example of that.
Think about a broadcast news format, or even a TikTok video or a Twitter thread. You have seconds.
Right.
Seconds. If I ask a guest on a show, why is the economy struggling? And they say, because taxes are too high. That is punchy. It fits on a bumper sticker. It feels intuitively true because it's so simple and clean.
But if the real answer is, well, we have a lag in supply chain logistics from 3 years ago, combined with an inverted yield curve and shifting consumer confidence in the housing sector.
Exactly. You've already lost the audience. And more importantly, you've lost the producer. The producer is in your ear screaming, wrap it up, we have commercial break for insurance coming up.
So the complex truth just gets left on the cutting room floor, and the simple, incomplete explanation gets aired.
Precisely. The bias is toward simplicity. It privileges the soundbite over the syllabus.
Mm-hmm.
And the real danger is that over time, we start to equate simple with correct. we start to think that if something can't be explained in 2 sentences, it's probably nonsense or, some academic gobbledygook. It filters out all nuance. It makes the world look black and white when it's actually a million shades of gray.
It's like we're being fed a diet of intellectual fast food because a 3-course meal takes too long to cook and eat. We feel full, but we aren't actually nourished.
That is the perfect metaphor. And that leads right into the next big one on the list, bad news bias, or as it's more formally known, negativity bias.
This is the whole if it bleeds, it leads thing, the doom-scrolling phenomenon.
It is, but it's deeper than just sad stories get clicks. It's about the fundamental asymmetry of how events happen in the world.
Asymmetry?
Yeah, the researchers point out something called big news bias. Think about how the world actually improves.
And slowly. Painfully slowly. Inch by inch.
Right. A new vaccine reduces child mortality by 0.5% a year. Incomes rise by a few dollars a month. Poverty declines by a fraction of a percent. It's incremental. It's a trend, not an event. You can't take a picture of it. It doesn't break.
But a plane crash, a terrorist attack, a bank collapse.
Those are sudden, they're visual, and they are catastrophic. They are discrete events. So the news, by its very nature, covers the sudden disaster, but it misses the slow miracle.
So the news covers every single car crash, but it never covers the millions of cars that arrive safely at their destination.
And this creates a completely distorted map of risk in our heads. The source material talks about the hierarchy of death. We are constantly bombarded with sensational, rare events. We see a shark attack on the front page of every paper.
Right. Makes you afraid to go in the water.
Yeah, but you're more likely to be killed by a falling coconut. We don't see front-page stories about heart disease, which is killing thousands of times more people every single day, because heart disease is boring, it's slow, it's statistical.
This reminds me of that concept that's been talked about a lot lately, missing white woman syndrome.
Yes, that is a perfect and tragic specific subset of this kind of sensationalism. The media has a template for what a victim looks like to generate maximum sympathy and viewership. And that template is usually young, white, attractive, and middle class.
So when someone fitting that profile goes missing, it becomes wall-to-wall coverage. It's a national soap opera.
Exactly. Meanwhile, thousands of people of color or men or older people or poor people go missing, and it's a footnote in the local paper.
If it's covered at all.
If at all. And the cumulative effect on you, the listener, is that you end up thinking the world is much, much more dangerous than it actually is, but you're also afraid of all the wrong things.
You're afraid of being kidnapped by a stranger in a white van, which is incredibly rare, rather than being afraid of not wearing your seatbelt or eating too much processed food.
It completely screws up our internal risk assessment software.
Okay, I want to distinguish between two others mentioned in the notes here. Mainstream bias and normalcy bias. They sound really similar, but the distinction seems important.
They're like siblings, but they behave very differently. Mainstream bias is essentially peer pressure for newsrooms. It's the herd mentality.
Chasing the same story.
Right. If the New York Times and CNN and the Wall Street Journal are all covering a particular story, every smaller outlet feels this immense pressure to cover it too, just to prove that they are serious journalists.
So you get this homogenization. Everybody is reporting the same angle on the same story because they're terrified of being the outlier, of missing the big one.
Exactly. Which means important, but less trendy, stories get ignored. Now, normalcy bias is almost the opposite. Or maybe it's better to call it a coping mechanism. It's the tendency to try to frame abnormal, catastrophic, or unprecedented events as if they are, well, normal.
Give me a concrete example of that. What does that look like in practice?
Think about the early days of a massive crisis, like the onset of a pandemic or the rise of a truly radical political movement that doesn't play by the old rules.
Right. Okay.
The media often tries to fit these square pegs into round holes. They'll cover historic breakdown of democratic norms as if it's just normal horse race politics.
Yeah.
Who won the week?
Or they'll cover a looming climate catastrophe as just a series of unusual weather events. A wacky heat wave here, a big flood there.
Right. Because admitting that the entire system is breaking or that something genuinely unprecedented is happening is, well, it's too frightening. And it's also just too hard to categorize.
So it's a failure of imagination as much as anything else.
It is. Journalists are trained to report on the status quo. When the status quo itself is threatened, the instinct is to just pretend everything is still functioning according to the old rules. It's a psychological defense mechanism.
That seems like it links directly to false balance. This is one I really struggle with because, I want to be fair. I want to hear both sides. When does presenting both sides become a form of bias itself?
It becomes a bias when the evidence is not 50-50. The classic example is climate change, though we see it in other scientific debates too, like vaccines.
Right.
If 99% of climate scientists agree that the Earth is warming due to human activity, and 1% of scientists, often funded by interested parties, disagree.
And you put one of each on a split screen on cable news.
Right. Visually, you have just created an equivalence. You have implicitly told the viewer, this is a legitimate debate between two equal viewpoints, but factually, you are lying to them.
Because it's not a 50-50 debate in reality.
It's a 991 consensus versus a fringe opinion. By giving them equal time, you are elevating the fringe opinion to the same level as the overwhelming scientific consensus. That isn't objectivity, it's a distortion of reality in the name of fairness.
It's performative neutrality.
Exactly. And finally, in our little taxonomy here, we have structural bias. This is the one that bores people at dinner parties but gets media scholars really excited.
Why is that?
Because it's completely non-ideological. No. It has nothing to do with left or right. It's all about logistics and routines. It's about the how of news gathering. Take the incumbency bonus, for example.
This is why the president is on TV every single night.
Yes. But it's not because the media loves the president no matter who it is. It's because the president is a content machine.
A content machine.
He has a press secretary. He has a dedicated briefing room. He has a giant staff that produces policy papers and announcements every single day. It is easy to cover the president. It is logistically simple.
And it's hard to cover a challenger who is, traveling around in a bus in Iowa.
It's incredibly hard. You have to send a reporter, a camera crew. It's expensive and difficult. So the bias is toward convenience. It's the path of least resistance.
Journalists are overworked and underpaid, like a lot of people.
That's a huge part of it. If one source, like the White House or the police department, spoon-feeds them a prepackaged story and another source makes them dig for it, guess which one gets the coverage? The spoon-feeder wins every time.
Okay, so we've established that the whole machine is tilted by laziness, by the need for speed, by our psychological wiring for sensationalism. But now as we get to the part of the research that really surprised me, the economics. Because usually when people say media bias, they follow it with follow the money.
And they should. They're not wrong to think that. But they often follow the money to the wrong place.
What do you mean?
They assume the money leads to some shadowy billionaire in a volcano lair, paying for propaganda. And sometimes it does. That happens. But much more often, it leads to ski resorts.
I have to say, when I saw ski resorts in the outline for an episode on political polarization, I was sure there was a typo.
It's honestly my favorite study in this entire stack. It was conducted by Zinman and Zitzowitz. They wanted to test a concept called supply-driven bias.
Okay, explain that concept first. What is supply-driven bias?
The supply-driven bias is when the person or organization providing the information, the supplier, distorts it on purpose to manipulate the consumer into doing something specific. It's a distortion for profit.
Okay, that makes sense. So back to the ski resorts.
So Zinman and Zitzowitz collected the daily snow reports that are issued by the ski resorts themselves, 6 inches of fresh powder overnight, and they compared those reports to the official government weather data from meteorological stations at the exact same locations.
And I'm guessing the resorts were a little optimistic.
Significantly so. They found a clear, measurable inflation of snowfall amounts. But here is the really clever part of the study, the nuance.
Go on.
They were most optimistic on weekends.
Of course. Of course they were. That's when the customers can actually come.
Exactly. On a Tuesday morning, the report might be pretty honest. But on a Saturday morning, when people in the city are deciding whether to make the drive up, that 2 inches of slush miraculously becomes 4 to 6 inches of fresh packed powder.
Wait, hold on a second. Is that really bias, or is that just, marketing? If a used car dealer tells me a 20-year-old Honda is pristine, I expect him to be lying. Why do we classify this as media bias?
That's a great question. It's because in many of these ski towns, these reports are treated as news. They're distributed through channels that people trust for factual information, local radio, websites, newspapers. And it perfectly illustrates the mechanism on a small scale.
Okay.
The supplier, the resort, has a clear financial incentive to distort the truth. And their goal is to change the behavior of the demander, the skier, to get them to buy a lift ticket.
Okay, I see that. It's a perfect, clean, small-scale model of a much larger and more complicated problem.
Right. Now scale that up. Think of the theory it posed way back in 1988 by Noam Chomsky and Edward Herman in their book Manufacturing Consent. They argued that mass media is essentially a giant ski resort for corporate America.
They called it the propaganda model, right? With the 5 filters?
Yes, exactly. One of their key filters was advertising. They argued that because mainstream media relies so heavily on advertising revenue, they simply cannot afford to seriously offend their advertisers.
So if a network is funded primarily by pharmaceutical ads, are they going to run a hard-hitting, multi-part investigative series on price gouging in the pharmaceutical industry?
Probably not. Or if they do, you can bet it'll be watered down. Herman and Chomsky called this flack.
Flack?
Yeah. If you step out of line and report something that threatens powerful corporate interests, those interests generate flack. They pull their funding. Their executives complain to the board. They fund PR campaigns against you. So the supply of news is filtered to protect the economic interests of the owners and their advertisers.
That makes total sense. That's the cynical view we're all kind of used to. The corporations are controlling our minds. But then the research pivots, and it points the finger right back at us. This is the demand-driven bias.
And this is the part of the conversation that gets really uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Because it's easier to blame the man behind the curtain.
Much easier. Demand-driven bias argues that, in many cases, media organizations aren't manipulating us. They are catering to us. They are businesses. They sell a product. And if the product that's in high demand is news that makes you feel good and smart about your political team, then they will sell that product by the truckload.
The customer is always right, even when the customer is factually wrong.
Exactly. And to prove this isn't just some modern internet phenomenon, the research takes us all the way back to the 1890s. The Gilded Age.
This is the New York Times weather study you mentioned.
Yes. Researchers Raymond and Taylor did this incredible deep dive into the weather forecasts printed in the New York Times between 1890 and 1899. Now, you have to think about that era. No TV, no radio, no internet. The newspaper was everything. And baseball, the New York Giants, was a citywide obsession.
So what did they find? What was the anomaly?
They found a statistically significant anomaly. On days when the Giants were scheduled to play a home game in Manhattan, the New York Times was significantly more likely to predict sunny weather.
You're kidding me. Come on. They were fudging the weather report for a baseball game.
The date is clear. If the team was playing away or if there was no game scheduled, the forecast was much more accurate. It lined up with the actual weather. But if there was a home game on the schedule, sunny skies ahead.
That is absolutely wild. But why? Was the Times being paid off by the Giants? Was there some kind of conspiracy?
There's no evidence of that at all. The implication is much more subtle and, I think, much more powerful.
Okay.
The paper knew its readers wanted to go to the game. The readers were hoping for sun. So the paper, perhaps unconsciously, or perhaps just to sell more copies to hopeful fans, leaned into that hope. They gave the people the forecast they wanted, not the forecast that was scientifically probable.
That is profoundly disturbing. I mean, more than the ski resorts, because weather is supposed to be objective. It's physics. It's barometric pressure. If you can bias the weather report just to make people happy about a baseball game, you can bias literally anything.
Exactly. And this brings us right into the modern era. Two economists, Melanathan and Schleifer at Harvard, built a behavioral model around this exact idea back in 2005. They basically proved mathematically that news providers can maximize their profit by confirming their viewers' existing beliefs.
So if I'm a liberal, I will pay more for news that tells me liberals are smart and conservatives are evil. And if a newspaper tries to be perfectly neutral, I'll just stop buying it.
You'll switch to the competitor who tells you what you want to hear. In a competitive market, neutrality can be bad for business. You're selling validation, not just information.
There was also a study on Weibo, which is like the Chinese version of Twitter, that backed this up, right?
Yes. Dong, Ren, and Nickerson tracked millions of posts related to stock market news. They found, unequivocally, that news which aligned with a user's existing belief, whether they were bullish or bearish on a particular stock, got significantly more traction, more likes, more shares.
We don't want facts. We want validation.
It seems to be a very powerful drive.
So, okay, let me sum this up. We have the supply-side corporations and advertisers protecting their interests. And we have the demand side, us, the audience, begging to be lied to so we can feel smart and validated. That is a truly toxic cocktail.
And we haven't even added the accelerant yet.
Social media.
The great accelerant.
We have to talk about the algorithm. Because if newspapers were biased by profit motives in the 1890s, at least there were humans in the loop. Editors, journalists. They had standards, hopefully. Now we have machines deciding what we see.
And the machine has a very, very simple goal. Engagement. That's it. It doesn't care if a story is true. It doesn't care if it's good for democracy. It doesn't care if it's kind. It cares if you look at it and if you share it.
And as we already discussed with bad news bias, the stuff we look at, the stuff we share, is usually the stuff that makes us angry or afraid.
Anger is the highest engagement emotion online. It generates more clicks, more comments, more shares than anything else. So the algorithm learns to prioritize content that triggers outrage. It's automated demand-driven bias on steroids.
Now, there's a study here from Nature Communications in 2021 about echo chambers and a concept they call drifting. This one seemed a bit more nuanced than the usual everyone is in a bubble take we always hear.
It is. It's really fascinating. They looked at how users drift ideologically based on the content they see, and they found a really interesting asymmetry.
Asymmetry. You mean the left and the right behave differently in these online spaces?
According to this particular study, yes. They found that right-leaning users tend to stay on the right. They are effectively locked in to their ecosystem, and they are exposed to a higher proportion of what the researchers labeled low-credibility content.
So what we would colloquially call fake news.
Yeah.
Or just heavily spun news.
It's a mix of both. Hyper-partisan sources, conspiracy sites, things that don't adhere to basic journalistic standards. But here's the really interesting finding. It was about the left. When left-leaning users were exposed to opposing views, so when the algorithm showed them conservative content, they didn't just dig in deeper to their own side. They actually tended to drift toward the center. They moderated their views.
That is fascinating. So exposure to the other side actually worked for one group in terms of moderation, but not the other.
In that specific data set, yes. It's a complex finding, and there are a lot of potential reasons for it, but it suggests that the echo chamber might have different kinds of walls depending where you stand politically.
Wow. Now, speaking of left and right on social media, we have to address the elephant in the room. If I go on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it this week right now, I will see 1,000 posts saying, the algorithm is censoring conservatives, big tech is woke, they are suppressing the truth.
It's a massive narrative. It's become a core part of the modern conservative identity, this idea that they're being persecuted and silenced by a biased Silicon Valley.
Is it true? What does the data say?
Well, let's look at the data, not the anecdotes. We have a major 2021 report from the NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights, and another big study from 2022 published in PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. These are serious, heavy-hitting analyses.
Okay, so what did they find? Did they find a systemic shadow ban on conservatives?
They found the exact opposite.
The opposite.
The PNAS study, for example, looked at algorithmic amplification across 7 different countries. In 6 of those countries, including the United States, the algorithm favored the political right. It amplified right-wing content more than left-wing content.
Wait, hang on. Let me process that. You're telling me that the data shows the algorithm boosts right-wing content more than left-wing content?
Yes. The data consistently shows that right-wing voices are often dominant in terms of reach, engagement, and amplification on these platforms.
But why? If the stereotype is that the engineers are all liberals in San Francisco, why would their machine be boosting the...
Right. Go back to the core mechanic. The algorithm doesn't have a political ideology. It has an appetite. It loves engagement. It loves high emotion. It loves us versus them framing.
Okay.
And a lot of populist political communication, which is currently more prevalent on the political right in many of these countries, tends to be more emotive, more sensational, and more high arousal. It's better food for the machine.
So the algorithm isn't ideologically conservative. It's just, for lack of a better word, thirsty for drama. And the right is currently providing better, more engaging drama for it to feed on.
That is a perfect way to put it. It's not a conspiracy, it's a feedback loop. The claim of being censored is itself a high-engagement, emotionally charged narrative that the algorithm loves.
That is a huge aha moment. The victim complex is actually a very effective marketing strategy that the system itself rewards.
In a way, yes. The data suggests the machine loves the very content that people claim is being suppressed.
There's one last piece of this social media puzzle, and it might be the most insidious, the comment section, the bottom half of the internet.
The place where hope goes to die.
But it turns out it also kills our perception of neutrality. This is something called the hostile media effect and the Gearhart study.
This study is genuinely frightening. Gearhart and their team found that a viewer's perception of bias in a news article changes dramatically based on the user comments they read below it.
So I can read a perfectly neutral, just the facts news story, but if the comments below it are all screaming, "This is fake news," or "The author is a communist," I will start to believe the article itself is biased.
Yes. You subconsciously project the hostility and bias of the comments section onto the journalism itself. The room biases the content. The conversation around the article becomes the article in your mind.
That explains so much about why everything feels so polarized. Even if the reporting itself is straight down the middle, the conversation around it is almost always toxic, so the whole experience feels toxic.
Exactly. We aren't consuming news in a vacuum anymore. We're consuming it in the middle of a riot.
Okay, we've covered the taxonomy of invisible biases, the economics of supply and demand, and the algorithmic accelerant. It really feels like we are living in a uniquely terrible and confusing time. But I want to step back. Is any of this new? Or have we always been this messy?
Oh, we have always been this messy. If anything, and this is going to sound crazy, we might be slightly less messy than we used to be, believe it or not.
Prove it. Take me back in time.
Let's start in 1798. The ink is barely dry on the Constitution. The paint is still wet on the White House. And what does the U.S. Congress do? They pass the Alien and Sedition Acts.
I remember this from high school history vaguely. This was under John Adams, right?
That's right. And these acts made it illegal, a federal crime punishable by prison, to publish a false, scandalous, or malicious writing against the government.
So literally state-enforced media bias. You could not legally criticize the president.
Right. If you think cancel culture is bad today, imagine being thrown in a federal dungeon for writing an op-ed, calling the president fat or incompetent. That was the reality.
Okay, point taken. That's pretty extreme. What about the Civil War?
Abraham Lincoln. We think of them as Honest Abe, a saint of American democracy. But during the war, he ordered newspapers in border states to be closed by the military because they were sympathetic to the South.
He just shut down the press with soldiers.
He arrested their editors. He had printing presses destroyed. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus for people accused of disloyal speech. He viewed them as a direct threat to national security, and he acted accordingly. It puts our current debates about media responsibility into a very different perspective.
And then we have the Vietnam era, the nattering nabobs of negativism.
1970, Vice President Spiro Agnew, he goes on national television and delivers this absolutely blistering attack on the news media, calling them these nattering nabobs of negativism.
What a phrase.
He accused them of undermining the war effort in Vietnam, of being out-of-touch coastal elites, of being biased against real Americans in the heartland.
That sounds incredibly, almost word for word, familiar.
It's the exact same political script we hear today. Attack the messenger. Delegitimize the institution so that people will only trust the administration. It's a political tactic that is at least 50 years old in its modern form, and much older in general.
But there's one historical example you brought up that isn't really about politics, and it's the one that really chills me to the bone, the satanic panic of the 1980s.
This is a critical case study, because it shows what happens when the media gets completely swept up in a moral panic. It's not about left versus right. It's about something much deeper.
For the younger listeners who might not know, set the scene. What was this?
The 1980s. It starts with a case called the McMartin preschool trial in California. And from there, it explodes into a sudden, nationwide hysteria that there was a secret underground network of Satanists abusing children in daycares across America.
And we aren't talking about one or two bad teachers. We are talking about allegations of...
We are talking about allegations of underground tunnels beneath schools, of ritual animal and human sacrifices, of witches flying, of children being forced to drink blood. I mean, truly absurd, cartoonishly evil stuff.
And the media, they reported this as if it were real.
They devoured it. Geraldo Rivera ran a primetime special called Devil Worship, exposing Satan's underground. Talk shows like Oprah, local news stations across the country, they reported these accusations as if they were credible. They put children on camera who had been coached by therapists to tell these wild stories.
And it was all fake.
Completely, totally fabricated. There were no tunnels. There was no cult. It was a mass delusion, fueled by anxieties about working mothers and social change. But lives were completely ruined. People went to prison for decades. Schools were shut down. The emotional damage was immense.
So why did the media fail so catastrophically there? That's not left versus right. What bias was at play?
It was a perfect storm of biases. It was sensationalism, for one, but it was also a kind of reverse normalcy bias. Let's call it credulity. The accusation was so horrific, harming children, that journalists suspended all of their professional skepticism.
They didn't want to be the one to seem like they were defending child abusers.
Exactly. They didn't want to be the one to say, hang on, I think this 4-year-old story about flying witches might not be true. So they became amplifiers of the panic instead of investigators of the facts.
And the expert insight here in the research is about the feedback loop of fear.
Yes. The media reports the fear. The police see the reports and feel pressure to make more arrests. The public sees the arrests and panics even more. The media then reports on the growing panic. It becomes this terrible self-sustaining engine of destruction that's almost impossible to turn off.
It reminds me of how media often treats minority religions in general, the whole cult narrative.
Stuart A. Wright wrote about this phenomenon. He pointed out that journalists usually lack the resources, the time, or the theological background to understand a new or minority religion. So if a weird group gets accused of something,
They just run with the cult accused of XYZ headline.
it's what he calls front-end reporting. They report the dramatic police raid, but they never report the exoneration 2 years later when all the charges are dropped.
So the damage is done on page 1 and the correction is buried on page 40.
If it runs at all.
So we've established that trust has been eroded by literally centuries of this stuff. It's not a new problem. But the modern numbers are just stark.
They really are. In 1985, a Gallup poll found that 55% of Americans trusted the media to get the facts straight. By 2022, a different poll found that half of Americans believe news organizations deliberately try to mislead them.
That's a fundamental shift. We've gone from they sometimes make honest mistakes to they are the enemy and they are lying to me on purpose.
And this brings us to the final section, the psychology of trust. Why do we believe the media is biased?
I mean, because they are biased. We just spent the last 50 minutes proving it with dozens of examples.
True, but there's a meta layer to it that's really fascinating. Research by a political scientist named Jonathan Ladd suggests that the primary cause of the belief in media bias is being told over and over that the media is biased.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, it's a political strategy. When political elites spend 30 or 40 years telling their base, the news is fake, don't trust the journalists, they are lying to you, eventually the base believes it, regardless of the actual quality of the reporting.
It becomes a tribal marker, a badge of identity.
Exactly. To be a good conservative or good liberal in today's environment, you must performatively distrust the other side's media outlets.
So we're stuck in a trap. The media has genuine, deep structural flaws, but our perception of those flaws is then exaggerated and weaponized by political rhetoric. How do we get out of this mess? Are there any solutions?
There are attempts. People are trying things.
Don't tell me the solution is just to put both sides on TV more?
No, absolutely not. As we discussed, both sides. Hedonism often leads directly to false balance. But there are some interesting algorithmic solutions being tested. Look at Taiwan, for example.
What's happening in Taiwan?
They use a system in their civic processes called poll.is.
POL.is.
That's the one. It's a digital platform used for public deliberation. But instead of optimizing for engagement, which, as we know, usually just means fighting, it's designed to optimize for consensus.
How on earth does it do that?
It maps out everyone's opinion on a topic on a visual graph. And then the algorithm specifically hunts for statements or ideas that large groups of people, even people who usually disagree on everything else, can both agree on.
So instead of throwing red meat to the most extreme bases, it actively searches for the common ground that everyone's standing on but nobody's noticed.
Exactly. It helps identify shared values and points of agreement that are usually drowned out by all the shouting. It's a tool designed for listening, not for broadcasting.
I love that. Using technology to fix the problem that technology helped create. What else is there?
A more old-fashioned idea. Radical transparency. The concept of the ombudsman or public editor.
The person inside the newsroom whose job it is to criticize the newsroom.
Right. NPR tried this for a while. Every time they cited a think tank in a story, they would explicitly state its political leaning. The Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank.
Yeah.
Or the Center for American Progress, a liberal think tank.
Just putting all the cards on the table for the audience.
It treats the listener like an adult. It
Yeah.
says, here is the source, here is their potential bias. Now you have the context to decide for yourself.
That seems like a really good place to land. We have covered a massive amount of ground today, from the initial definitions to the invisible biases of concision and negativity that shape everything. We looked at the ski resorts and the 1890s baseball fans, the eternal dance of supply and demand. We saw how the algorithm seems to amplify the right, while the right claims censorship. We traveled back in time to the Sedition Acts and the Satanic Panic, and we ended on the psychology of distrust.
It's a heavy lift. There's a lot there.
So if the listener is going to walk away with one thing, one tool for their mental toolbox to navigate this, what should it be?
I think we need to stop viewing bias as a bug in the system that we can fix by just, firing the bad journalists. Bias is a feature.
A feature, not a bug.
It's a feature of our biology. We are hardwired to crave bad news. It's a feature of our economy. We pay for confirmation. And it's a feature of the modern media environment. Brevity kills nuance.
It's the water we swim in, not a shark that we can hunt down and kill.
Exactly. So the only defense is to become a more conscious, active swimmer. It's about critical thinking. When you see a story, don't just ask yourself, is this true? Ask, why is this story being presented to me in this specific way, at this specific time?
Is it supply? Is the owner of the outlet pushing an agenda?
Is it demand? Am I clicking on this story because it makes me feel good and validates my worldview?
Or is it structural? Is this just a short, simple, sensational story that was easy to produce?
Precisely. You have to diagnose the type of bias before you can account for it.
And that leads us to the final thought, the provocative one you wanted to leave everyone with.
We love to blame the media. It's the perfect faceless villain. But the research, especially all that demand-side stuff, it points the finger right back at us. We say we want unbiased news. We say we want the complex, nuanced truth. But our clicks, our subscriptions, our shares, and our viewing habits tell a very, very different story.
We vote with our attention.
We do. And right now, we are overwhelmingly voting for comfortable lies and rage bait. The market isn't broken. It's just giving us exactly what we ordered. So the real question isn't, how do we fix the media? The question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we fix our own appetite?
Wow, that is the challenge. The next time you click on that angry headline, ask yourself, am I ordering the junk food again?
It's the only way to ever change the menu.
Thank you for guiding us through the mechanics of the machine.
Always a pleasure to take things apart.
And thank you all for listening. We'll see you in the deep end next time.